The Toronto Comic Arts Festival would like to honor and acknowledge the original caretakers of this land, the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat peoples. We are in a territory that was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon One Pump Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, Haudenosaunee, and allied nations to share and care for the land. This land is also covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. This acknowledgement is a reminder that we are all treaty people and that we have a responsibility to the land and each other. TCAF celebrates the long history of sharing stories on this land and is committed to increasing Indigenous voices and perspectives in our programming.
Okay, hello everyone. We are doing a cool little conversational chat today. I'm Anoosha.
Okay.
I actually wanted to do like kind of like slightly interviewee format. Because you're just such a cool person and I'd love to like learn more about you. And I know that just like whenever I talk to like any like art students or people like coming up, the one thing that they always ask is like, how did you get started? And so I think that could be like a really interesting place to start off with. So I would like to ask you, well, actually, should we do the intros first? Yeah, let's do the intros first.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's probably a good idea.
Okay, I'm Anoosha. I am a children's picture book author and illustrator. I have worked on over 40 books, including, and I brought props, including these over here. I had my author debut last year, and this is it. It's called That's Not My Name. I also work as a character designer for animation with studios including Netflix, Disney, DreamWorks, etc. I'm in Toronto and I have a cat called Link and she has white socks. And on to
Ooh,
you.
what a good intro.
Thank you.
Um, yeah, I'm Kay. I'm also so excited to be talking to you because I feel like you have just such amazing, valuable insight and like wisdom. And I feel like you're really like you're so generous with your knowledge as well. So it's really exciting to be able to talk and also like promo your YouTube channel where you give away so much amazing information as well. So yeah, I'm really excited. And I feel like it's a really great balance because we kind of work in like the same industry, but in almost like slightly different capacities because you do the
Yeah.
picture books and I'm in graphic novels and we're both very interested in what the other person does. So I'm just
Mhm.
like, perfect.
So much to learn, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm Kay. I'm from New Zealand. I've never left. So born and raised. I do graphic novels. I think I've done about 6 or 7 so far. Probably most well known for the Tea Dragon Society, which I could have brought as a prop, but I
Oh,
had to like.
wait, I think I have one.
You have one? Oh my gosh.
Wait, give me one quick second. Keep doing your intro. I'll be right back.
Okay, sweet. Yeah. So I had to like scurry from one room to another because my Wi-Fi broke. But yeah, I did the Tea Dragon Society, and my most recent book is the Moth Keeper, which came out just this earlier in March. So I'm really excited about that. Most of my books are for like middle grade readers. Ah, there it is. Oh, gorgeous! Thank you. Oh my gosh, dipping in. Yay! Thank you.
I
So yeah,
missed
that's
your entire intro, sorry.
that's the first of a trilogy, and then I'm now currently making 3 standalone graphic novels for Random House Graphic. Um,
Mm.
yeah, and I do a little bit of illustration-y freelance on the side, but recently I've been able to really just focus on the graphic novels, which has been super nice. So, yeah.
Amazing. Oh, I have so many questions to ask you. But yeah, like jumping off of that first one, how'd you get into this? How did this all happen?
So kind of I want to say by accident, but I feel like there's not really accidents. Like I feel like quite similar to your journey where it was always there. It just wasn't what I realized I
Oh,
could
so
do and
interesting.
should be doing. Yeah, yeah. So I guess I was always making like web comics and things in my spare time, but I kind of never really thought that comics was like a real
Like as a kid or even when you like
oh
after
yeah,
school?
Definitely as a kid, yeah. I think because I remember making whenever I drew as a kid, it always had like kind of speech bubbles. It had like characters and stories. I wasn't really drawing sort of scenery or standalone things. Obviously, tons of anime fan art, of
Oh
course.
yeah.
And I think because we've got a really good library system here, and they got a lot of manga in when I was quite young, so I had this
No
kind of like
way.
early exposure to this way of storytelling, and I think went in quite deep, as well as like just coming up with like plots for my Neopets
Mhm.
characters and stuff. Um, yeah, and then I skipped art school. I did not go to art school at all. So
Cool.
I was kind of just drawing for fun. I guess like because I guess the industry is much smaller in New Zealand, and at the time
Mhm.
there like wasn't a sort of as didn't feel as connected to the US like publishing
Mhm, mhm.
monolith. And so I guess I just didn't think that it would necessarily work out if I like fully pursued that. So I was kind of just doing it on the side.
Mm.
Um, and then published Princess as a web comic. I did a few other like sort of very short, like 10-page web comics that like at the time like
Mhm.
spread quite far, which was
Can
the
I
first time
ask,
it ever happened.
did you study something else in school?
Yeah, I studied English and Japanese. I was
Oh,
going to
that's so
go and
cool.
teach English
Okay.
overseas. Was my
So
was
that's
my
what
hope.
you were doing like while you were doing these webcomics and things like that.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much.
Mhm.
That was my life plan, and things changed. But yeah, so I think just from having some web comics available online, my editor Ari at Oni Press found them, and then kind of because it already existed,
Mhm.
and she was looking for a kind of queer fairy tale comic to publish, so that was the start, and just keep going.
Wow.
But it took quite a really long time for it to really sink in. That's like, oh, I'm doing this. Like this is what I'm doing.
Are you like a full-time illustrator now?
Yeah, yeah, I'm doing this full
Okay.
time. Yeah.
Man, it's so crazy that like I feel like 90% of us like in the industry right now, like our jobs would not exist without the internet. It just makes it so much more accessible, especially like when you live outside of North America,
Right.
and like the central hub of like publishing and everything, like makes it so much easier to like connect with people.
Yeah.
Um,
Because was that even like more intense when you were like quite interested in animation and things?
yeah. Oh my gosh.
More, you know, like it's always been a bit more global.
Yeah, because like I mean I live in Canada now, but like I moved here in 2015. Prior to that, like I moved around a lot when I was growing up because of my dad's job. So I have lived in Saudi Arabia, Dubai, Pakistan, Switzerland, the US, and Canada, just like moved around constantly. But like as a kid, you know, I was like mostly in the Middle East and I went to school in Switzerland. I got my degree in illustration over there. And then it was at a school that I didn't really love. And I was kind of there by accident and not really by choice. I wasn't like, definitely wasn't my first choice. And so when I graduated and moved to Canada and like I wanted to work in the animation industry, I was like, I felt like I was really falling behind because I thought that I needed to be in the US. I thought I needed to go to like Cal Arts and like have all these connections and go to a good school and everything. And I didn't even go to a Canadian school like Sheridan because I knew a lot of Sheridan people as well. And so I really felt at the beginning that like I had all these disadvantages. Um, but I always tell people now that like I was able to make it work because of the internet. Like Twitter was a complete lifesaver in making those connections with like agents and art directors and all of that, and just like getting ingraining myself into the community to the point that like most people will either think that I live in LA or they'll be like, "You went to Sheridan, right?" And I'm like, "No, but I might as well have though." um, but
Well,
yeah, it's
that's
like without the internet, I really would not have this job.
yeah. It's I think it's kind of like it's like almost like that first step you really
Hmm.
need the agent for, and then once like you have an agent, it almost doesn't matter where you're based.
Oh,
But
for
even
sure.
to that step, like, have you been with your agent for like a long time? Have they seen you
Yes,
through
I
what?
have been with them since 2018. Prior to that, like as soon as I graduated, I was part of an illustration agency that was not a good fit for me. It didn't really work out. And so I don't know. I wouldn't really recommend them to anyone, but like I just have like issues with illustration agencies in general, like the big ones that people think of. I'm not going to say any names. But just in general for like publishing, a lot of people like don't know is that like literary agents are the way to go because they know the industry. But yeah, I was part of that Saki agency for a while, and then I left them, and I was working on Bilal Cook's Dal, which I think is this one back here. And I had sworn myself off of agents. And then the author of this book, her agent emailed me and she was like, "Oh, do you have an agent? Would you want one?" And so she wooed me over. And yeah, I've been with her since 2017, 18. And I absolutely love her. And it has made like such a huge uh, change in my career for sure. Like, I don't know where I would be without her.
Yeah, no, absolutely the same. I know what you mean about the agencies because I feel like the thing that's so nice about an agent is having someone who's like really personally invested in your
Mhm.
like not just your career but your well-being, like
Yeah.
in you from the
Just
big
like
bad world.
having that personal cheerleader when even when you feel like, oh, my art sucks, or like when the
Yeah,
whole world is against you, they're like, no, you're great. I believe in you.
yeah, or
You
when
really
someone
need that person on your corner.
yeah, or when someone's like offering you some work and you're like, oh, I think I'd charge about this, and your agent's just like, double it, like we're just gonna double it, like so definitely it's like I guess when young artists, if they're in that stage of starting to try and move into the industry these
Mhm.
days, when they ask for advice, pretty much all I say is just like get an agent, get an agent.
I
Like,
know.
like you can certainly like break in and do really well without one, especially if you like know your rights, know what
Mhm.
you want, know what's fair in that. But
Yeah. But as a
uh,
new artist, you probably don't know that kind of stuff.
very hard to know until like without hindsight, I guess. So I
Yeah.
feel like the agent has all of the hindsight. They've seen
Mhm.
so much. So I really, yeah, it's kind of almost like life changing.
How did you get your agent? How did you guys get
Through a
connected?
friend, yeah, my
Oh,
friend
okay.
kind of like already was working with her, and I was like, I knew I kind of wanted an agent, but I was very nervous about the full submissions process.
Mm.
My friend just be like, hey, pss, 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 pss.
That's so nice.
So it was like a really nice chill process of just kind of like just in like um, talking and seeing if the project I had in mind was a good fit for her and if like we got on well and all that. And it was just like, oh my gosh, love at first sight. So it was super easy.
Oh my
Um,
gosh, I'm so glad to hear that. It makes such
yeah,
a huge difference for sure.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's so interesting because I'm sure I went through like a phase as well where I was like, oh, I should try and join one of these agencies and get lots of work that way. But I'm really happy with the like just more like individual kind of approach.
For sure.
Mm, yeah.
I want to talk to you about your projects as well. Like, what do you have coming out right now?
So the most recent one that I've just finished is the Moth Keeper, which again I
Yes.
could have been organized and brought along, but I didn't. So it's out. So that's just come out, and I'm currently working on like the next sort of standalone in a series from Random House.
So that's these three books, they're not connected in any way.
No, other than just the vibe.
Is there like that's really interesting. Because like your past work, like they were series, right? Like the princess stuff. But sorry, the tea dragon stuff. But like, um, how do you feel about like? Do you feel like is it easier to work as a series or like do you like coming up with new ideas? You know what I mean? Because like I would worry. I feel like I would feel worried that like you would make one book and you it like turns out amazingly. How do you follow up with that? I always like worry about that kind of stuff.
I think it's kind of a mix. I guess the Tea Dragons books were a lot shorter just because of the art
Hmm.
style I was using. Um, I kind of had to sort of slightly limit the length and make sure I was like really keeping them quite simple. So I think overall they're almost like a book length in a way because they're
Oh,
just
okay.
if you think of like often graphic novels are between like 200 or 300 pages even for middle
It's
grade readers.
insane. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think these ones, the ones I'm working on now, they feel they are chunkier. They're
Hmm.
bigger, so I feel like I can do a bit more within each concept. I think it's kind of freeing in a way because you kind of switch up the concept completely. So like the first
Hmm.
setting is kind of this like magical nocturnal desert community. So I had a really good time with the kind of twilight, like dusky palettes and stuff.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
And then the next one is kind of like more of like a like sort of middle earthy like
Yeah,
fantasy
yeah.
series. So it's going to have like much more like story. It's going to have much more like earthy kind of palettes and things. So
That's what you're working on right now, or is it completed?
working on now. So it hasn't actually been announced, but
Ooh,
I
okay.
can say it contains a lot of horses and a lot of violence. That's probably as much as I can say at the moment.
Interesting. Is
Yeah,
that new for your work?
yeah, definitely definitely the horses.
Ooh.
Learning on. But it's been really really fun to work on, and again I think it's like it's so refreshing because it's like this brand new world concept characters. So it's been like I think like with each project I quite like to have a challenge of some kind. Like I kind of don't really often do the same book twice, where I want to mix up like techniques and like brushes and like the setting and stuff. So I was wondering,
Yeah.
is that the same for you? Like, do you consciously try and make each book feel like quite different to
Oh
work on?
yeah, absolutely. I feel like this is more of a recent thing. I will say that like none of my books that I have like illustrated on my own, none of my picture books have had sequels. But my chapter books, I've worked on several series of those, but I've kind of I don't think I'm going to do another series for a while just because the last one that I worked on was Monster and Boy, which was a 3-book series. And while it was fun, it's just such a long commitment. And I totally understand what you mean by like kind of getting bored with it. And I had been working on it for 3 years. And by the third book, I was like, I want to change things up. I'm tired of this style. I've improved like so much. I feel like I could do so much more with it. But you kind of have to stay within that general look for a chapter book. So that's like one thing. But for your question, I have more recently had like a new take, a new perspective with my art, and I think it's mostly because I I was always a digital artist, and I always had like really tight schedules for picture books of like usually for like 3, 4, 5 months, which is really not a lot of time for a picture book. I know like graphic novel schedules are can be like really crunch as well. But for like 3, 4, or 5 months is like pretty short for a picture book. But I kept getting all these rush schedules, and that kind of meant that like I didn't have time to explore with my work. I would kind of just rush through each of my books, and I'd have like 4 or 5 books working on in a year, or like 3 books happening at a time. My I'm Perfectly Designed book was illustrated in 2 weeks
What?
because it was a rush job.
What?
I know it was a whole thing, but like I had like time to sketch on it, but like because of like internal stuff and like there were like a lot of delays internally, um, I was left with 2 weeks to complete like the final artwork, and they couldn't give me an extension because it had to be completed for like the Christmas time publication. So of course the artist suffers,
Yeah.
but yeah, so I got the work done, but like, that's what I mean that like for most of the books that I'd worked on, I was working with these really tight schedules, and my work suffered a lot, and my creativity suffered a lot. So I kind of was working on autopilot mode, and the burnout didn't help and everything. Then last year, because the burnout was, enough, I decided to learn how to paint. And I made it kind of like a goal for myself for 2022. And then I made a series of paintings for Gallery Nucleus, and I had like a solo exhibition. And then I ended up loving traditional painting so much that I decided to make my next picture book traditionally painted with collage. And since that book, because I was now starting to get year-long contracts, because that was completely new for me too, to have like that much time. Now I finally had time to explore and to try new things and new mediums. And yeah, for like these past 3 books that I've been working on, they've had completely different looks and different mediums and different styles and everything. And I'm really thankful that I have like the time to do this. And yeah, it makes such a big difference. And I feel like everything else that I made prior to these 3 books, I'm like, I can't even look at them. Like, what was I doing creatively? I've definitely evolved, I think.
Yeah, that's amazing. So now all your books are fully like painted by hand.
So one of them has been completed traditionally. I have 2 that I'm working on now, like one is they're both in sketch mode right now, but I am planning for both of them to be traditionally painted as well.
Oh, that's so amazing. So like that's
Yeah.
my name is traditional.
It's digital. That was my last digital book.
Okay, no, fair enough too.
Mhm.
That's so exciting. That makes me just like my heart like just
Yeah.
swell to hear because it's like I think like yeah, it's so easy to get into that like production line sort of mindset. When you were talking about that, I was like, oh, I know. You just don't have the time to play anymore.
Yeah. And I
And it's
think I actually did want to ask you about that for like graphic novels, because like that's one I would love to work on a graphic novel one day, but I know that like the process for picture books versus graphic novels, like the major difference is like the amount of work you have to do, right? Because like picture books are like 32 pages, graphic novels are, what did you say, 200?
I mean, it depends. I think children's graphic novels can be about 100, I think.
Yeah.
That would be kind of, I think, well, actually, to be honest, I mean, you can do what you want. Princess is like 50 pages. Like
Okay, yeah.
first Dragon book is 50 pages. So
Mhm.
it's up, I guess you can have some leeway, but yeah, it
Yeah.
definitely.
But then, like, even within those like 100 pages, within each page, you have like 5 frames of like mini illustrations, and
Yeah.
you can't be as like precious with those frames as you can with like a picture book spread. So I want to like ask you about that, like what that process is like.
I think it's like you I think you quickly learn what you can do in terms of the finish, in terms of like what like I guess what it does is it kind of distills what comes most naturally to you and is the easiest because the only way you're going to finish this project is with the path of least resistance. So in a way, it's like I feel like I always come to a project, or I'm doing it less these days, but in the
Mhm.
past I've kind of come to a project with all these ideas of how it can look, and I've done all these like style tests and experiments and things, and they've been really helpful. But in the end, it almost just comes down to like the simplest.
Efficiency.
Yeah, it's and I think like because the thing that comes it may not be the most like it's kind of it's hard to describe because I think I'm definitely in the best place now at the moment for actually producing things where it's happening really quickly, but it doesn't feel like a grind because I think I'm finally fully connected to what I'm doing in the moment. And so it really comes down to the line, just the line, this trying to find the simplest shape, the movement in each panel, um, in a way that's like uncluttered, really clear and direct. And I think the more I've kind of focused on that, the easier I'm finding it to even just get through. Yeah, sorry, I feel like that was such word salad, but I
No,
guess
no, that totally
but
makes sense.
it's like it's like you can't overthink it because you just
Yeah.
and you kind of have to just get into a flow state. So whatever comes out naturally is like the best approach, even if you kind of go into the project thinking like it could look like this and it could look like this.
Yeah.
Like whatever wells up most naturally is probably the best approach because you're going to be expressing like your emotions most directly.
Mhm.
You're going to have less obstacles between like the kind of the storytelling, I guess, which is like the most sort of important thing.
How long do you have to work on these books?
So this contract, because my agent was like, mm-mm. So my very generous for graphic novel schedule. So
Okay.
I have 2 years per book,
Oh,
which
amazing.
is very very generous. I did all my Tea Dragon books in 1 year each, so that was
Jeez.
like
Okay.
kind of intense. But yeah, so the 2 years has been really nice. It gives me like a full year basically of like development. So scripting,
Oh, so
thumbnails.
like your script was not ready prior to this.
It was no. Actually, I'm really curious to ask about this as well in relation
Ooh,
to like
okay.
because
Mhm.
like for a graphic novel, you don't really have to pitch like a script
Mm,
necessarily. Like you may pitch some of it if it's your first graphic novel with a certain agent or a publisher, but that's kind of you work that out with your editor.
mhm.
So there's like a really, I'd say, like there's room for changes, but it's quite strict. You come in and you kind of do your script, and then you do your thumbnails, and then you do your pencils, and then you
Mhm.
do your inks or final art, depending on like the
Right.
style and things. But it's like because it's so dramatic to change anything later on, it's like they're getting those kind of sign offs is really important.
Mhm.
at each stage. So it's kind of yeah, so and before even starting, it's more like on an idea plus like an outline rather than having written the entire script. I'm kind of
Okay.
curious whether like when you pitch a picture book, do you almost have to have like a full like almost like dummy book done, or is it?
Yeah, so I had like a 2 book deal, and this is kind of different with like some of my other friends who had 2 book deals. So I went in with 2 fully fleshed out pitches, dummies, whatever, for That's Not My Name, and then my second book coming out next year, where I had like my pretty much what I had thought like final manuscript, and then the book dummy, which had like rough like rough sketches and then 2 fully illustrated pages. And I had that for both of those books. With some of my other friends, they had a completed dummy for 1 book, and then they negotiated for a 2 book deal. And then, like after they finished that first book, then they would start to come up with ideas for that second book, which
Right.
I kind of wish I had done. I really love my idea for the second book. But although That's Not My Name was such an easy book to work on, like there were barely any changes to the artwork, no changes to the text. I was like done within 3 months, and I was like, oh, I have like so much time left over. The second book has been more typical, where it went through so many changes and just like a lot of back and forth. Where at first I was like, oh, what am I doing wrong? Because I was comparing it to that first book that like I am a one-hit wonder, like this book is going to be awful. But then my agent was like, no, this is what happened with Name was too good. Like it was a little too easy. This rocky like back and forth is what usually happens. Um, but yeah, I think that's usually the case. And hopefully, when I pitch my third and fourth book, I think I would probably just go in with one book concept and then figure out the second one afterwards.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. So when you like go back and forth, you're going back and forth on like the writing, the art, the layout, the design, like all kind of consecutively.
Um, yeah, kind of, because I think it depends like from writer to writer. I when I was like writing my first books, because I had been an illustrator for the 6 years prior, and I didn't even think that I wanted to be a writer, and I kind of was like, okay, this is a step I want to take, but I have no idea what to do. So initially, I was just writing up scripts, and I wasn't really figuring it out, and it wasn't really working. And my agent had the amazing idea that like, Anusha, you are a visual person, why don't you like try, making the dummy like as you're working on it? And so that's been the kind of flow that works best for me, I think, where I'll do both at the same time and kind of just like, because I feel like maybe it is the same for you, but I'll write a little bit and I'll draw a little bit, and then they'll both kind of affect each other in a cycle where like the art will influence my text and the text will influence the artwork. I can't just do like 2 different blocks, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Um,
I was really curious about that because it's like I think in some ways it's almost deceptive because picture books seem so simple, but it's like they're so deeply integrated that it's just like changing one thing is like suddenly you've got to change a whole bunch of other things.
Yeah. So I wonder if this is the same in graphic novels, but like in a sense, because in picture books, the main thing that you're working against is your word count. Picture books usually have like a max of like 500 words, which is not a lot, right? And you want to try to do like the show, not tell kind of thing, where you want to just like say as much as you can. Well, say as be as concise as you can in the text, and then anything that's like extra can be shown with the artwork. So for example, like Bobby walks into the ice cream parlor and he's wearing a red shirt. You can just cut out the red shirt because you're showing it through the artwork, right? So like that was like the thing that was going on, where like I'd be writing up the script and I'd be like, wait, you know what? And then I would draw this thing, and then I'd realize that, oh, I can actually cut some of these parts out because I can just show it through the artwork. So that was like the big cycle thing that was going on. When I wonder, is that like kind of the case with graphic novels as well, because it's such a visual medium?
I think so. I feel like everyone's kind of different in terms of how much they visualize. I've seen some people who almost work in thumbnails and then script, like they've kind of drawn heaps and heaps of different scenes or like
Hmm.
have to kind of keep those two together. I think because I've kind of been on the like production line for a while, it does feel like for me, I'm able to kind of separate like my script, like
Ooh, okay.
from the art to an extent, I guess, because so I'll definitely start with like drawings, especially of the characters, to try and like figure out who they are and their
Mm-hmm.
personalities. And I also really try to draw some of those like real like, you know, like capital M moments,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
like it's kind of like from every movie that you remember of just like the scene or something that really like gets you
Yeah.
going, big emotional, blah blah blah. And it's like I think if you've drawn that out, that's gonna stay with you for the whole
Mm-hmm.
project, kind of see you through it, and like you can always remember like, oh, I was really connected to that particular moment. That's what I'm building towards and stuff. So I really try to keep a few of those and just like little drawings of characters doing things, like so I kind of know how they act and
Mm-hmm.
react and stuff. But I'm also super lucky that I've always worked with editors who are like familiar with my work, but also like trust me a lot. So my scripts are bare. They're so bare. They're
Oh.
bare. It's really just like the dialogue and then like set direction. It's like a play where it's like
Oh, okay.
there's like very little description and things. And I don't have to like uh do like panels. So like
Mm-hmm.
in a script, I'm not kind of having to like um there she goes. I'm not having to like say like panel one, this
Mm-hmm.
this character does this and stuff. And I've worked from that before and I found it really, really, really challenging.
I guess
Where
like too rigid of like to like
yeah,
plan it out beforehand.
that's when it feels super production line. And it's like very, very, very common with sort of monthly or like
Mm-hmm.
IP kind of comics and things. And I think for some people it's probably more helpful because it helps them plan the length and kind of visualize the page before they begin. But I think that's kind of like for me, that's probably my limit in terms of
So
where I can
interesting.
like yeah, where I can kind of work through writing. It's like the writing for me is mainly just the dialogue and like character
Mm-hmm.
like movements and
Right.
interactions.
So then because you're not putting all these directions and panels and everything, do you ever find that like once you actually get to the drawing stage that you have to change the text because you didn't plan that stuff out beforehand?
Yeah, yeah, definitely there's times where like it just doesn't come across as clear um or maybe it needs like an extra bit of sort of what would you call it, like acting in between to
Mm-hmm.
kind of show like between two things where I've kind of just jumped in the script and then realized you had to fill in a wee bit. um yeah, mostly it's like it's something you get into a rhythm for. Like it kind of when you were talking about this kind of back and forth of like balancing the words and the
Mm-hmm.
drawings, definitely really reminded me of the thumbnail stage, which
Mm.
you're basically doing that and it's you're kind of coming up with the page layout like page by page. And that's almost like the most draining part of the whole. It's like once you've done that, you're like, sweet, okay, just make the book. But
Right.
coming up with how it actually like sits together so that it's gonna like make sense um, and like resonate. And yeah, I think I think also with a graphic novel, it's like having the script done really helps in terms of making sure the story makes sense because you're gonna go
Right.
200 pages, you don't want to get to the end, you're like, wait, plot hole. So
Oh yeah,
it's
you got to figure that stuff out early for sure.
yeah, it saves time. Like everything you can do earlier on and get that like really tight. It's kind of
Hmm.
like a movie, I guess. Like the more you can do in the scripting stage, the less you'll have to do in terms
Yeah.
of like, refilming or like editing or like cutting something that you just spent
Hmm.
like ages on. So it's kind of it's similar to that, I think.
Yeah. The third book that I'm working on, it's not like part of my two-book deal. It's like a little kind of like its own separate thing. That is one that I'm kind of working a little bit differently, where I have just finished doing the manuscript. Like no art has been done at all yet, and we've just been like really typing it up as best as we can, and then moving on to art. And I've put in like really descriptive art notes and everything, but I definitely think it's gonna end up changing a lot where once I actually get to the art, then I'll be like, oh, actually, I have to go back to the text and like cut this out and cut this out and like mix this around. Um, so yeah, we'll see like how that compares, where like having those two segments like really separated from each other versus like the usual cyclical thing that I do.
Mhm.
So that'll be an interesting experiment. But I think that's just mixing it up every now and then to find out what works. You never know. Like you might end up finding like a new way to work that actually works really well for you.
Yeah, definitely. Like being able to experiment in things from
Hmm.
different books to books. I was curious, what about graphic novels like really like draws you to it and like makes you want to try one? I guess. So
Mostly
I'm
because I haven't done it. Oh, sorry.
sorry, it was so dark. Anyway,
Okay,
sorry.
yeah.
It started raining outside. I was like, this looks so creepy. Like I'm just like in the dark. But yes, anyway.
I've always wanted to do a graphic novel, mostly because I have not done one yet. I've done a couple of like anthology type of things. I did the Last Kids on Earth, where like I did one of their short stories. I have a little comic in this like environmental story comic that's coming out. So it's like I've done like a lot of short form things, and like I've gotten a lot of offers to illustrate other people's stuff, but it's such a huge commitment um, that I think if I was going to do it, I would want it to be my own story. Have you ever like illustrated other people's work, or do you always do your own projects?
I've done it once for in terms of a comic.
Hmm.
And
Never
yeah,
again?
yeah, kind of. It was I guess it just didn't really leave me feeling extremely fulfilled in the
Yeah,
same way that like working on your own thing from start to finish. And you're right,
yeah.
it's so much work that it's kind of tough. And I think it depends because like I'd still be really open to like working with a script that really
Hmm.
resonated with me, like something that like I couldn't have written myself.
Right.
So that kind of creates its own interesting like challenge and um, I guess like yeah, I think just working purely focusing on the visual would be quite fun in a way, but I think you really have to feel connected to the script.
Yeah, yeah. So that's why, like, I think again, like, if I found like a script that was like completely resonated with me, then I think maybe I would, and for the right price as well. But but most likely it would only be like if I wrote it. But yeah, the thing that's stopping me is that it's such a huge commitment, and I've also never written anything that intense and long before, and
Mm.
it's scary. I don't know how you do it.
The good news is that you don't have to get too far into it before you'll kind of know whether you really want to see it through or not, because you kind of have to workshop the story, the characters, everything to like such a stage that I think you're kind of on the jumping off point and you kind of know like, yeah, I'm ready, I really want to tell this, I'm going to take that next step,
Mhm.
commit to this like long format. Or you're kind of like, oh no, let's just back up a bit, this is fine, like
Yeah.
I'm glad I explored this idea, I saw it through. But yeah, it's because there's that extra step involved of like the pitch where you basically have to come up with the kind of elevator pitch, the long sort of
Hmm.
summary, development art, and sometimes they do want to see some like finished pages and
Right.
stuff. So it's kind of like, yeah, if you're still in love with it when you get through all that, then it's probably a good sign. But I also think like, I don't know if you experience this with picture
Hmm.
books as well, but man, I just expect the slump now. I'm like, yep, the slump's coming. It's going to happen. I'm going to get to a point where I'm just over it. I'm done. I don't want to be on this project anymore. And for me, it usually happens during the penciling stage because it's
Oh,
like,
okay.
yeah, so like the thumbnails are done. So I kind of know the layout for each page, and I've got like the kind of expressions and the dialogue things. And this is like the really like just draw the book phase of just coming in with pencils and figuring out perspectives, backgrounds, all that kind of stuff. Like drawing the details on each character, not to mention just like actually trying to convey some emotion and things. So it's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
it feels, and then you're like, man, even when I'm finished with this, I've still got to ink it and then color it. So it feels like truly the middle of the
Oh,
project. And
wow.
I wonder if other people get this as well. But yeah, I definitely kind of now know that that's coming.
I think like my stage is similar to yours, but maybe for different reasons. Where like I have like two slumps, I guess, and one of them would be after I'm done with my rough sketches, where I like jot down my ideas, my thumbnails, and they're like super rough. Then I have to clean them up, and I have to start to figure out like, oh, how do we draw cars? How do we figure out perspective? How do I make this sketch
Cars.
make sense? And especially if it's a really complicated page. So like name is like a very easy book. There are barely like any backgrounds in it. It's like all character stuff that like I know how to do. It's like super easy. For like this book that I just finished, it's very background heavy, and that's not really my forte. And it's a lot of perspective, a lot of buildings, a lot of cars, all of this stuff. And like, I don't know what I was getting myself into. I had to draw a horse. I don't know how you've been drawing horses. Like, how do their legs? Ugh, I don't get it. But all of this stuff where I had to kind of figure out ways to make it make sense. So that's like one of my slumps that I have. And then the other is usually towards the end of a project where usually I'm done or almost done. I've got those last few pages left where I'm just kind of running out of steam. And then the publisher wants those revisions, and I'm like, no, I'm done. I've moved on already.
We've moved on. Yeah. Oh my god, that's like, nothing like when you've just like mentally you've celebrated. You're like, yeah, done, moved
Yeah.
on. Like, can we actually just change this? Like,
Yeah, so it's insane. So like the second book, the cover was a tough one to work on, where like it's kind of like a high concept book for children. So trying to figure out what the cover should be was pretty difficult. And I think we went through like 8 different variations and like so many like revisions and back and forth. And like halfway through, I was just like, I'm done. I'm done. I don't want to talk about this anymore. Yeah, we were like just discussing it for like 2 months, but finally it's complete. And I'm not expecting anything else. We're waiting on the proofs now, I think.
nice.
But if they asked for anything else, I don't know what I would do. I've checked out.
If you're up to the proofs, I'm sure it's all good.
Mhm.
But I guess is that like something that's quite like fun about writing your own books is like you can choose exactly what kind of setting and things. So it's like
Yeah, it's cool for like these books is that like I get full creative control, and like as someone who had prior to this always illustrated other people's work, I mean, I know that like for like author illustrators, we work as a team. It's pretty 50-50. But I would say for like picture books, I don't know, maybe I'm a little bit biased, but I would say like the illustrator does a little bit more work. But in terms of like the publicity and just like the fame and like all of that kind of stuff, it always appears that like the author gets a little bit more of the fun parts of it. Where prior to my author debut, I would never do school visits. I would never be invited for like interviews, and like the author would get to do all the fun stuff.
oh my gosh.
And once this book came out, I have been like booked and busy, and like I get called for interviews all the time. I get like all of this attention that I never did before. And yeah, that was like a really big change for me. And that was like one of the main reasons why I wanted to start writing my own projects. Because like this is a really common thing for illustrators is that, the author, the publisher will share like the cover of the book and they wouldn't even mention the illustrator. That's like unfortunately a very common thing. And yeah, I just didn't like being second fiddle, especially I don't know if I'm being controversial, but I feel like illustrators do a bit more than the
No,
author for like picture books at least.
no, I think it's exactly the same discussion in graphic novels, and there
Mhm.
has been exactly the same kind of like in the industry, really like the author almost getting more prominence and credit when it's like obviously very skillful to be able to write a good
Mhm.
novel, but it's also an incredible amount of labor and skill to be able to illustrate.
Yeah,
um,
and like people always forget that like the illustrators are also storytellers.
yeah, definitely, and they're working like to really convey the story as
Mhm.
well. It's the ability to kind of understand and like interpret the scenes and
Mhm.
like lay them clearly. Yeah, no, I totally get you, and I think that's like a really common discussion as well within comics of this
What do
kind
you
of like
think, what
ability.
takes more time for you, the illustration part or the writing part?
Definitely the
Yeah.
illustration for sure. I think the script, it kind of depends because it depends on whether a script is like one of those ones that just like you said with um my name, like it's
Mhm.
just kind of comes into the world. It's just like
Right.
it already existed and you're just like breathing life into it. It's like just so natural. And then there's other ones that really take a long time to
Mhm.
nut out. I think it's really common for graphic novels as well. So I'd say the book The Moth Keeper, that took me quite a wee while to really like like with kind of back and forth from the agent at my editor, because it changed shape. It changed from a children's, like a really young children's book into middle grade, being a bit older, with like being able to explore like the emotions of like loneliness and burnout and all that kind of thing a bit more deeply. But changing it from a children's book to a middle grade is kind of like, it was also quite challenging. So that took me quite a while to kind of.
Why did that change come about?
I think because I think I was really, really burned out with like all the graphic novels that I'd done to that point. I was just like, I'm just gonna do something really, really, really simple with like little cute animal characters. And it was really cute. It was really like, it would have still been like a nice book, but I think I was missing that, like, there were still things I wanted to say that needed slightly more complex characters, like slightly longer, like page count, and maybe just a little bit more, because you can achieve so much like depth and like emotion through picture books, but I think with a longer format you can kind of explore an idea from like a lot of you can kind of have lots of different ideas working together, whereas I think picture books are probably strongest when they like really distill down into like one or two key kind of ideas. So yeah, that was the kind of change where I realized like, all right, I've got a few more in the tank, it's fine.
Was it something that like your agent or publisher suggested, or did you come to that conclusion?
I think either one would have been fine, because Random House Graphic does both children's and middle grade, but it was something that did have to be kind of decided, because it's like quite a different pay grade and quite different like page count, and might have been a different schedule as well. Like if I was doing a picture book, it would have been between like, 50 and 100 pages, probably more pages. So these ones all were more like a bit over 200.
Dang. What has been your favorite project to work on so far?
I think the one that I'm working on at the moment, which is like so like I can't even talk about it, but it's like, I guess what I'm feeling is like my like I think it aligns the most closely with just myself as an artist, as like a person. Like I just feel like everything that I've been doing up to this point, all the things that I've like, all the burnout, like the stuff that's been really like the low points, I feel like I'm able to kind of look back on them all as a whole and see like, okay, well I got to this point where I could make this book, and it's like really like going to mean a lot to me, and it's been like really, overall, aside from the slump, which happens, it just has to happen, it's been mostly very, very smooth and like just kind of welled up easily. Yeah. How about you? What's been your favorite project?
I think it would have been this book that I just completed. There are like some things that I'm not super happy with, just because it did go through a lot of changes from like what it originally started off with, and I think I just need like need to step back a bit, just because I'm still a little bit too close to the project. But in terms of like what it represents, I think it is something completely different than I've ever done before, because it was my first traditionally painted book. It's a combination of like paint and paper cut collage, which like if you had told me like 2 years ago that like, Anoosha, you're going to be a collage artist, I'd be like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, why would I ever do that? I just kind of like stumbled into it, and it was one of those things where like when I was learning to paint last year, I had mostly wanted to learn to paint because for my third author illustrator book that I'm going to try to pitch this year, I knew that I wanted that to be traditionally done, but I knew that I did not have the skills for it. So I was like, okay, I'm going to spend 2020 learning how to paint so that next year I can try to work on this book. So I got really good in like for like those few months or whatever where I was learning to paint. And then I had this second book come up, and I was originally going to do it digitally. All of my sketches were done digitally. And like they were pretty intense, like a lot of background stuff as well, which would have been a lot easier to do digitally. And then I was like, what if I do this traditionally? I know that was not the plan, and maybe I'm not ready yet, but like, wouldn't it be goofy? Wouldn't it be so crazy if I did it with real paints? So yeah, I just kind of like, I decided to try it out. And then I was like, you know what, I'll do like 1 or 2 pages. And if it sucks, then whatever, I can always go back. And then as I was painting, then I was like, wouldn't it be crazy if I added collage? And then it just kind of just went from there.
Chaos,
Um,
chaos. That's amazing.
yeah, I know. And I did not know what I was doing the entire time. I made so many mistakes. I was definitely not doing things as efficiently as I could be. And so by the end, yeah, it was kind of a mess. Because like I said, like the sketches that I did digitally, it was so hard to recreate that with real paints and paper cut and everything because they were so intricate in it. So like in my future books, because I do want to continue doing collage, when I do my thumbnails, I'm gonna at least have that in mind and work for that medium. A lot of the problems came because of like that clash of mediums. Um, but yeah, I just kind of stumbled my way through it. And I think, yeah, I think that's probably my favorite. Just looking at the book now, even though, like I said, so many mistakes, so many things I would change, I cannot believe that I did it. I'm so proud of myself for doing it.
I'm so intrigued. I'm so excited to read this book.
Oh, well, I'll send it to you. Don't worry. I'll give you a little secret peek.
When will it come out?
I think it's spring of next year. We don't really have a date yet, but it's supposed to be spring.
Nice. Oh, exciting. So you feel
Yeah.
like you're, would you keep kind of like, do you feel like you've still got ideas coming to you for picture books? Like, seeable, is it?
Yeah, kind of. So, last year I came up with an idea for a book, and this is like the one that I'm going to try to pitch, and it's based off of my childhood, and I'm originally Pakistani, and it's kind of based on my life over there. And I think it would look really amazing as a book, and I have like a collection of ideas. It's not really like anything yet. So I'm really hoping people like it and I'm able to make it happen. For my fourth book, which hopefully I can get another two-book deal, I don't really have anything yet. I have a potential idea, but I think it's goofy. I'm kind of, so here's the other thing. That's Not My Name is a pretty serious book. And it's kind of very much in line with all of the books in my career path, where for some reason, this is kind of like an issue for marginalized creators in the publishing industry, is that you only ever get contacted for books about your identity, where it's like if I get, publishers like, hey, Nusha, would you like to work on this book? And I'm like, oh, cool. What's it about? They'll be like, about being brown or being Muslim. And I'm like, again? And that's fine. I think it's great that we're having like more and more, like diverse stories and everything. And I think it's definitely important. And it was great when I was working on it for the first couple of times. But to only be considered for those types of stories, it just feels like your people are only looking to hire me because of my identity and not because of like what I can offer. So yeah, and I just wanted to make funny stories. That was like the big thing, is that I just wanted to work on comedies, but I, I feel like they're only reserved for like white male creators. I don't know. Like I would never get contacted for that kind of stuff. And so, although Name is like more serious and in line with what I usually do, my second book is a comedy, and I was like, if no one's going to hire me for it, I might as well do it myself. My third pitch is another serious one, and then I want I'm going to try like just going back and forth, And so, fourth one, I want to make another comedy. I think I'm a funny person.
Yeah.
That's my own opinion. I feel like I have a lot of jokes to offer to the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that's really, really interesting. And I think that is like one of the reasons it's so important to be able to just tell your own story from like start to finish. And yeah, like just being able to like make your own way and sort of, like having an agent who can really like
Yeah.
you to put your work out there and find the right place to publish it as well, who's going to
Mhm.
understand like, you know,
Yeah.
what you want.
Do you have your idea for your third book already? Or do you not know yet?
It just came to me recently. I was like, I was
Whoa!
I was a bit like concerned. I was like, oh, have I actually just like, is the well dry?
Ooh,
And I've already
okay.
signed this 3-book deal. So like, ooh, this is gonna be tricky. This is gonna be interesting. I was like, do I have to do like a fairy tale retelling or like maybe some kind of myth or legend. Like there's different options if you have really like run out. But no, thankfully I did end up having a little idea.
How do you come up with your ideas? I'm
It
gonna
kind
be in that position soon, and I don't know what to do.
I mean, I think unfortunately it's like you can't force it too much.
Yeah.
And it's come along and it will just feel so small. But as long as you like write it down, I think it like stays and just hangs out. And I think like if you've kind of got a few little seeds on the go, or like just little tiny dots of ideas, sometimes then you read something and it really like kickstarts like, oh, this is like this is what this needs to be, or like this is how I could like develop it. I guess in the case of this one, I was reading I was like, man, I haven't read a really good just like shoujo manga in like a long time. I need to get into some like romance. So I did that and I was like, oh, this is it. This is what I need to do.
Oh,
This one I really want to try and integrate like kind of middle grade like a kind of like young teen character with like an older character like a sibling, so that's kind of balancing two perspectives of maybe more like adult relationships and adult interpersonal kind of like emotions and things, and then like a child like a younger perspective and things. I haven't told my editor about this idea yet, so I hope she's
ooh, okay, good luck.
anyway. That's basically where I'm at, and I think it's like in a way like not having anything locked in is really good because you don't know how you're going to change in the next however many years. Like it's
Oh
going to
yeah,
be
for sure.
at least another 2 years I think before I really start on this one, so it's kind of it's almost like quite like nice to know that it's like it's not locked in. And
But you have it like in your pocket whenever the time does come as a backup.
the backup, it's like it doesn't have to be this, but and this could also change a lot. Like it's like I'm trying not to keep to like it's like it has to be exactly what I originally set out or like my original idea or anything. So yeah.
So have you ever had ideas that like they just did not follow through? You know, like either you pitched them and they weren't accepted, or like you had like an idea but it changed so drastically that it's like an echo of what you started with?
Yeah, I think I had a few different ideas like while I was pitching Moth Keeper, and then those were kind of worked through I think with my agent more to figure out like what would be the best one to actually proceed to submissions with. I had a whole idea for a third book that I just totally trashed, and I got really I
Oh.
wrote a full script and had like characters and like world, and I did like a lot of development and stuff, but I think realized it was actually just going to be too long and too much of stuff that I didn't really enjoy drawing.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
Yeah. So I think that's always really important for like graphic novels, is to like those kind of like I guess the parts that are like what would you call it? You've got to be really realistic about like what'll actually be fun to create over the course of like a year.
Yeah, I mean, that's like the thing. It's such a huge commitment. And I don't know about you, but I get bored very easily. That's like one of the reasons why I haven't worked on a graphic novel. It's like I just worry that like at some point I'll get tired of it. Or yeah, I don't know. Do you ever feel like that?
Yeah, no, I think you get tired every time, but
Okay.
it's like when you do it like I guess seeing it like full, like I guess like you were saying how your most recent book that you finished was really challenging, but it's also the one that you're like the most like you feel so proud of for completing and getting through and like creating. So I think it's kind of similar feeling of like
Okay.
yeah.
That's good to know. That's good to know. I would like to one day, but it's wait, how do you start? What are the steps in making a graphic novel?
I guess the start like it's probably pretty similar. So starting with your idea, which you've kind of outlined to the story like level. So it's like you can start the beginning, middle, and end. Here's why it matters. Here's why like the characters like do these things, and that's what your editor can kind of give you feedback on. And then yeah, thumbnails. So figuring out how everything fits on each page, pencils, and then inks and coloring, I think, can be much more like fluid. Like with Tea Dragons, I basically just went straight from like pencils to finished artwork because there was no ink or anything inside. But yeah, it's probably quite similar to a picture book, but yeah,
just longer.
But yeah, I'm really keen to try a picture book at some point.
Oh yeah, what's stopping you?
Time mostly.
Okay, that's fair.
I also like, don't want to like underestimate just how like tough it is to really make a good picture book. And
It
just,
is.
like,
It's hard.
so that's something.
But
That's,
it's just like different skill sets, I think.
yeah, definitely. I was wondering like what do you usually find like the most challenging part of designing a picture book, I guess.
Designing a picture book? I think I want kids to be able to enjoy it. I think like that's like the main draw is that like you can really make it easy, just like draw exactly like what's on the text and just kind of like churn it out. But like I want to like add like so much depth, like I want something that like kids can always like come back to and like find new things, like something for the parents as well. And again, because of like that thing where like the writers have like such a small word count, as illustrators, you have like the opportunity to be like that second storyteller to like really expand upon it and like add way more depth and like just like so much more, right? So I think that's like the interesting part of, especially because there are like some manuscripts where I get where they have like the text and then they have like some description and they'll kind of tell me exactly what they want on the page. But more often than not, it's just like, I'm gonna show you, do whatever you want. And then it's like, okay, you have this text of like, Johnny's walking in the park or whatever. And that can be interpreted in like a million different ways. And then it's all about like, okay, what's like best for the text and like what's going to move it forward. And yeah, I think that small word count is like the challenging part of like, how do you interpret this? Yeah. But it's a lot of fun, but it's also a little overwhelming sometimes.
Yeah, was it really fun doing like a book reading for the first time? Like, how did it feel like
Yes,
reading the book out and like
yes.
seeing the way they reacted?
I literally just had a reading yesterday that went really well. It was my first full day visit because like I've only recently started doing a bunch of them because my book was nominated for the Forrester Reading, which is a Canadian, like it's like a literary program in Ontario or even like I think all of Canada where like kids will be reading it as part of their curriculum. So I've been doing a lot of visits because of that. And so yeah, yesterday I had an awesome visit for it was a full day and it's really great because I see that like my book is making a difference. So like one of the things is that like whenever I start a presentation, I always begin with like, raise your hand if anyone has ever said your name wrong before. And like without fail, like everyone always puts their hands up, And I'll always end up with stories of like kids saying how like it makes a difference, or like kids will be like, will be inspired to be artists or writers. When I say I live in like a pretty diverse community, when I mention that I'm originally from Pakistan or I'm like Muslim, then like I'll hear like the gasps just like, oh my gosh, like just knowing that there are kids in the crowd, they're like, oh my gosh, like I could be this. And then I had this story yesterday where like after the signing was done, a bunch of kids wanted to get my autograph. And like one of the kids came up and I believe his name was Haran with a C at the beginning. And then he asked me to spell it with the C, Charin. And so I wrote it with the C. And the librarian afterwards told me like that was actually a really big deal because his name is Haran because it has a C at the beginning. At the beginning of the school, everyone kept calling him Charan to the point that he got so frustrated, he asked everyone to remove the C from his name, even the teachers, like, and his attendants, to like, he's now known as Haran with an H. To ask me to include the C meant that like he absorbed the book, you know what I mean? And he had never done that before, so that felt really good.
It's so lovely. It's gorgeous.
Yeah. Oh, I think we have like 2 minutes left, so I guess like we could wrap up with like, yeah, what do you want to promote? Like, where can people find you?
They can find me very infrequently on Instagram.
Okay.
Handle Strangely Katie, which I barely use anymore. But they can also find my book in bookstores, which is really exciting. So
When's it coming out?
It came out in early March, but
Oh,
I
okay.
think it's coming out in other places, like maybe in the UK. I'm not sure what quite the deal is there
Okay.
yet, but yeah. So, and yeah, hopefully I'll be able to come to TCAF in person sometime.
Yay.
But yeah.
Let me know if you do. Okay. Yes, I am on all the social medias, Foxville_art, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, unfortunately. I also have a YouTube channel, which you mentioned at the beginning, and it basically covers everything you need to know to be a professional illustrator, how I make my books, stuff like pricing, contracts, etc. All of the boring stuff that you should know how to do. And then, yeah, I have this book came out last year. You can find it pretty much everywhere. Yeah, I think that's it. It was really lovely chatting with you, Kay. I really
So
hope we get to see each other in Toronto, or I would love to come to New Zealand.
yes,
New
New
Zealand?
Zealand.
Yes,
Yeah,
one day.
but no, I'm sure I'll be up in Toronto sometime because TCAF's awesome. So yeah, it
Yeah.
was so lovely to talk to you.
Okay, thank you.